There is an ancient treatise in Sanskrit, some scholars consider it older than the Bhagavad Gita, called the Ashtavakra Mahageeta, which consists of a dialogue between sage Ashtavakra and his disciple King Janak. This dialogue provides an extraordinary instance of the divine element in the relationship between a self realized guru and a superbly ripe disciple. That is, the one who's just waiting for that one quick spark of initiation into truth that brings about sudden enlightenment. The Ashtavakra Gita at the same time provides astonishingly direct, positive, and unequivocal exegesis of the doctrine of non duality, the Advaita Siddhanta, perhaps the best that has ever been done. The Ashtavakra Gita is not nearly so well known as the Bhagavad Gita, for the very reason that it is so specifically clear and unambiguous that it does not lend itself to the twists and turns required by the commentators to justify their own philosophical prepossessions or spiritual learnings. It's straight, it's direct, and it's right at your face. It contains superbly authoritative statements and clear assertions, so obviously based on the intuitive experience and convictions as to deny and utterly negate any effort at exegetic ingenuity or intellectual acrobatics. It's a comparatively small treatise, compact and well knit, containing about 300 verses of 2 lines. The Gita, conveying the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sage Ashtavakra was also so called because he had 8 curves or deformities in his body. There are differing accounts concerning the deformities. One legend has it that when Ashtavakra was in his mother's womb, his father used to recite the Vedas every day, and Ashtavakra used to hear them, so recited. The father, though a devout and a pious man, was not a very scholarly man, and thus used to commit a number of mistakes in reciting the Vedas. Ashtavakra, already highly mature spiritually, could not bear to hear the Vedas so badly recited, with the result that he could not help squirming in his mother's womb and thereby becoming deformed in 8 places. There is a legend in Mahabharata that Ashtavakra's father, named Kabir, used to recite the Vedas to his wife Sujata when the child was in Sujata's womb. The child one day suddenly cried out, "Through your grace, my dear father, I have learnt all the Vedas, but it's a pity that you commit several mistakes in your pronunciation." Kabir, a great scholar according to this version, and renowned for his learning, could not bear this insult from the unborn child, and cursed him that he would be born with 8 curves in his body, and thus was born Ashtavakra, the 8-curved, the twisted, distorted, bodied sage. The story continues that Ashtavakra's father, Kabir, went to the king Janak's court in order to obtain some favor, and was asked to debate on spiritual matters with the court scholar named Vandin, who was apparently the son of King Varun. Kabir was defeated, and as a result was banished to the netherworld as a priest at a sacrifice being performed by Varun. When Ashtavakra was 12 years old, he heard of his father's plight and went to the court of King Janak in order to participate in a general debate where the most renowned scholars were invited. Though Ashtavakra found it difficult to get entrance into the court, but finally managed to do so, and when the assembly saw him wandering into the court, all the assembled scholars began to laugh. Even the kindly and pious King Janak could not suppress a smile, but his amusement turned into astonishment when he saw that Young Ashtavakra was also laughing as loud as anyone else. The king turned to the little deformed character and said to him, "Young man, I can understand why the others are laughing, but I can't understand the cause of your laughter." Ashtavakra suddenly became serious and told the king that he was laughing because he could not understand how the king could expect to find truth in an assembly of cobblers. चमारों की जमात में राजा जनक सच कैसे ढूंढ सकते हैं? And now the king was angry. Gravely asked Ashtavakra कि भाई समझाओ, explain himself. The young lad answered equally gravely. Simple है राजा साहब. All those honored guests are no better than cobblers because they cannot see beyond the skin and they cannot see the presence within the physical body. एक चमड़ी को परखने वाले को चमार ही तो कहते हैं कि उन्होंने सिर्फ मेरी चमड़ी देखी, उन्होंने मेरे अंदर की आत्मा, मेरी परमात्मा को तो नहीं देखा, चमड़ी के पार की है, तो चमार ही तो हुए. If the earthen pot is broken, does the space within get broken? If the pot is mishappen, does the space get mishappen? My body might be deformed, but I am infinite, limitless, eternal, absolute bliss, Sat, Chit, Anand, Advait. The king, already highly advanced spiritually, knew at once Ashtavakra was completely self-realized. And the very next day, at his request, he was accepted by Ashtavakra as disciple. मुमुक्षु थे राजा जनक. उनकी जिज्ञासा बहुत करुणामयी मुमुक्षु थी. उनको तत्काल ही ज्ञान हुआ. The story of Ashtavakra, like others concerning many other saints and sages and prophets, is obviously not to be taken literally. It is not difficult to see the real significance of the story, as in the case of similar stories concerning other sages and prophets like Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Zarathustra. In the case of Ashtavakra, the deformation of the body in 8 places could also have a reference to the eightfold path of yoga. Yam, Niyam, Asan, Pratyahar, ध्यान, समाधि, कोई एक भूल रहा हूँ मैं. Ashtavakra avers that enlightenment does not really need any practices and disciplines of body or mind. Enlightenment can be sudden and can occur in a split second. As soon as there is clear realization, not a mere intellectual understanding, that there never has been any bondage for anyone, and that one is always free, mukt, and that freedom has always been one's birthright. क्योंकि मुक्त होना मेरा स्वभाव है और वो स्वभाव आनंद है और वो मैं हूँ. इन तत्वों से परे, इन bondages, इन तत्वों, जिंदगी, एलिमेंट्स, इन सब से परे मैं मुक्त हूँ, मैं आनंदमय हूँ. Thus there is the legend that the Buddha was born on his feet with his mother in standing position. Instead of falling, he took 7 steps, and at the 8th step he halted and made his 4 basic pronouncements. Sansara means unhappiness. It is possible to overcome unhappiness. There is a way to overcome unhappiness, and the state of happiness is nirvana. In the case of Zarathustra, it is said that unlike any other newborn infant, he let out not a cry, but a huge laugh, because he considered that life was meant to be enjoyed, subject to not making others unhappy, though. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds was the essence of his teaching. It is the only religion in which fasting in the normal course is not only not recommended, but specifically forbidden. Lao Tzu was supposed to have been 80 years old when he was born. The obvious import of the legend being not that he was in the mother's womb for 80 years, but that he was conceived in wisdom and was born wise and lazy. His teaching, astonishingly similar to that of Nisargadatta Maharaj, did not involve any practice or disciplines. He held that there is no goal and no path, and the deep and clear understanding of the perfection of what is does not need 80 years of fulfillment, but on the contrary, can bring about sudden and instant enlightenment. It is for this reason that many legends and myth in religions are obviously not to be taken literally. They are supposed to convey the significance of the particular teaching in a quick graphic way, to convey that the seed contains the potential which can be seen in the seed. Indeed, those who have seen someone as the seed, as an infant and a young man, find it difficult to accept him as a sage in later life. You will often hear it said, "Believe me, I have known him since he was a child, but there was nothing of the sage or saint in him." मैंने तो बचपन से देखा इसको, तो बड़ा शरारती था, ठंडा बालक, सबको कितना तंग करता था, परेशान करता था, घूमता था, फिरता था। इसमें तो ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं था। ये बुद्ध कैसे हो सकता है? For many years, Raman Maharishi, the sage of Arunachal in southern India, remained in a cave all by himself, and in the meanwhile his family had given up all search for him. Then when his whereabouts became known, efforts were made to get him back home, but all to no avail. Ultimately, when his own mother went to him and asked him to return home with her, he was forced to tell her that he was no longer the man who had left home, and that man does not exist any longer. जब मैं गया था तो मैं कुछ और था, अब मैं कुछ और हूँ। अब वो घर बार माँ बाप कुछ नहीं मेरा। The dialogue between Ashtavakra and Janak begins with the question, "You neither the earth, nor the water, nor the fire, nor the air, nor space. You are the witness of those five elements as consciousness. Understanding this is liberation." तुम इन तत्वों के परे अपनी आत्मन अपने चित्त में हो, उसी में विश्राम करते हो, और तुम इनके साक्षी हो, तुम ये जानकर सुखी हो. Having established a sound working relationship with his disciple, Ashtavakra quickly goes straight to the core of his teaching in this verse and follows it up at once with the next verse, in which he hits his disciple with a 1-2 combination that would have knocked out a disciple of lesser caliber. But Ashtavakra has judged the level of his esteemed disciple accurately. Says Ashtavakra, if you detach yourself from the identification of the body and remain relaxed in and as consciousness, you will then, this very moment, be happy, at peace, free from bondage. अगर तुम अपने आप को, अपने शरीर, दिमाग, मन, इन सब से अलग करके अपने चित्त की शांति में विश्राम करो, तो तुम अभी इसी वक्त सुखी और मुक्त हो जाओगे from all bondage. This is the very core of the teaching. The rest of the dialogue is merely the expansion of this one essential truth. यही सब कुछ है और इसी का विस्तार है. These two verses must have stunned Janak into a state of spiritual shock, which was precisely what the sage as a guru intended to do. He must have realized that Janak was at a stage of spiritual advancement where a certain block had developed, and that block could only be removed by a powerful blasting. The result of this sustained blasting will soon be seen in the sudden transformation which takes place in the disciple at the end of this initial instruction. There are certain words in these two verses which are most significant in relation to sudden enlightenment, which comes about merely through understanding, which needs no efforts of any kind. Ashtavakra says, through these two verses, you are not the body. It is composed of the five elements. तो इन पांचों तत्व से बना शरीर नहीं हो. You are that consciousness which has provided the inert body with the sentience that makes the senses functions in regard to their objects. तुम वो चित्त हो, वो साक्षी हो जो इन सबको देखता है. तुम वो दृष्टा हो. It is the sentience which makes the psychosomatic apparatus work as a unit. Anticipating the query from his intelligent disciple, the Guru tells him further, you are not the physical organism, but consciousness, which works not as someone in charge of the operations of the physical organism, but merely as the witness of the operations. And you have wrongly identified yourself as the individual, as the doer of all the actions that take place through the physical organism, na karta or na bhokta, and thereby unnecessarily assume the responsibility for the actions which take place, and thus assume the bondage from which you are seeking liberation. The witness cannot be the doer, because तुम साक्षी हो, और जो साक्षी हो वो कर्ता कैसे हो सकता है? And you are therefore not the doer. With this understanding, you can detach yourself from the identification with the body. अपने आप को करते हुए देखो, अपने आप को चलते हुए देखो, अपने आप को सोते हुए देखो, अपने आप को बात करते हुए देखो. जो भी करना है होश में करो, होश में बैठो, होश में चलो. जो होश है वो साक्षी है, वो दृष्टा है. और अगर तुम उस साक्षी की स्टेज पर पहुंचते हो तो तुम अपने आप को अपने शरीर से अलग कर सकते हो. और जब भी तुम अपने आप को किसी चीज़ से अलग करोगे तो उसके इमोशनल डिप्रेशंस, एंजाइटीज भी कम हो जाएंगे. And when you do this, you will automatically assume your true position as the witness, the sakshi, and remain relaxed in consciousness as consciousness. Just as sunlight makes objects in a room perceivable, but it is not concerned with what happens to the objects. जिस तरह सूर्य का प्रकाश सबको प्रकाशित करता है, लेकिन ऑब्जेक्ट्स को क्या होता है उससे उसे कोई फर्क नहीं. उसी तरह से तुम अपने भीतर से इस संसार को प्रकाशित करते हो. इस संसार में क्या होता है उससे तुम्हें कोई फर्क नहीं. It is in consciousness that all phenomenal objects appear, and such objects are perceived and cognized by consciousness through the sentient objects. But consciousness is not involved in what happens to the phenomenal objects, including human beings. Consciousness, the real you, merely witness all the events as in a dream. The state of being disidentified from the body is the state of witnessing, when the individual, me, is now present. At this state of detached witnessing is indeed the state of liberation. This is why The self-realized Guru means when he says that when you remain relaxed in consciousness without identification with the body, is the state of liberation is sudden and immediate. The basis of this concept of sudden enlightenment is the understanding that there cannot exist any individual as such, because all there is consciousness, in which appears the totality of the phenomenal manifestation, including the individual human beings. The supposed individual has never been under bondage. He thinks he is in bondage only because he has forgotten his original identity as consciousness, witness, and has falsely identified himself with the physical body and the thoughts. The words remain relaxed in consciousness form the very basis of Ashtavakra teaching. विश्राम की स्थिति में स्थिर अपने चित्त में साक्षी दृष्टा, हर चीज का दृष्टा, खुद का दृष्टा, जो तुम्हें देख रहा है वो आंख दृष्टा, न दर्शक न दृश्य बट दृष्टा, जो सजा वो दृश्य, जिसने सजने वाले को देखा वो दर्शक, और जिसने सजने वाले को देखा उसे देखा, तुम्हें देखा, वो दृष्टा। वो दृष्टा आत्मन परमात्मन सत चित एब्सोल्यूट ब्लिस आनंद साक्षी ही अष्टावक्र का सूत्र है. All it needs for enlightenment to occur is a clear understanding of a dimension quite different from intellectual comprehension. What intellectual comprehension brings about is a belief in what is comprehended, but an intuitive apprehension is based on faith. Intellectual comprehension belief is based on argumentation, logic, effort, and conflict. Intuitive apprehension faith is based on a certain inescapable inevitability, a relaxed acceptance of what is, totally free of any doubt or opinion. At this stage, Ashtavakra wants Janak to accept his teaching on faith and does not put forward arguments to support his statements. Faith does not necessarily mean a conflict with reason or a substitute for reason. It merely means not excluding the possibility of the existence of certain levels of reality beyond the pure sense perceptions. Faith is the power which is capable of bringing about spontaneous apperceptions of truth. Faith intuitively recognizes the ring of truth and opens the eye of the heart to apperceive the truth. Ashtavakra's confident assertion that enlightenment will occur this very moment clearly means this present moment, which is eternal moment, is the eternal moment. When the mind and its conceptualization is totally excluded, as he knows that his disciple is at that stage speaking from the body mind. Level. As an individual, he says, you will this very moment be happy, at peace, free from bondage. Abhi ho ja mukt isi waqt. Because तू जहाँ है, जैसा है, जो है, जिसके साथ है, परिपूर्ण है, पूरा है, तुझे कुछ भी नहीं चाहिए. तू अपने आनंद में है और उसी आनंद चित्त में स्थिर रह और हो जा मुक्त, सुखी हो जा.
तुझे उसके लिए व्रत नहीं रखने 51, तुझे उसके लिए 100 दिन उपवास नहीं करना, तुझे उसके लिए गंगा मैया को जाके आरती नहीं करनी, तुझे उसके लिए कोई कर्म कांड धर्म कांड नहीं करना, तुझे उसके लिए ज्ञान कांड में प्रवेश करना है, जानना है, जागना है, सिर्फ जागना ही तो है। जागो, तुम सब बुद्ध हो, जागो। You will this very moment be happy, at peace, free from bondage, because that is what he was seeking. What he means is that as soon as there is disidentification with the body, the individual me, the ego, will have disappeared. And a stage will have been reached in which the me cannot be present as against the you. This is a stage in which fear and conflict are totally absent a stage. In other words, of happiness, of peace, of freedom from bondage. Indeed, at the end of Ashtavakra's initial teaching, covering his first 20 verses, his royal disciple is shocked out of his complacence of his individuality and has the actual subjective experience of unicity, and cannot help but bursting out into a song of his spiritual independence. And then Ashtavakra proceeds. You have been bitten by the deadly black serpent of the ego, and you therefore consider yourself as the doer. Drink the nectar of the faith that you are not the doer, and so be happy. In this verse, Ashtavakra goes to the root of the matter. What is it that is at the root of the concept of bondage and unhappiness? It is the sense of the doership and the notion of volition. The entire mechanism of what is known as living one's life is based on the notion that whenever a human being acts in any manner, whatever the act it is, because he wants to act in that manner. In other words, it is supposed that the volition is behind every act of human being, and that he is therefore responsible for it. The fact of the matter, however, is that the human beings usually do not act, but react to an outside stimulus. If even little thought is given to the matter, it will be obvious that very few actions are truly the result of volitions or acts of will. Most of the time, living, for most people, is conditioned by a series of reflexes, based essentially on instinct, habit, and even propaganda. The scope of deliberate, considered action is in actual life extremely limited, and yet almost every person firmly believes that he is the doer. And that is why Ashtavakra refers to this notion of individual volition, acts of will, as the bite of the deadly serpent of the ego. The sense of doership, karta, the notion of volition, is at best only an impulse, a demonstration of ego, of me concept. प्रतीत होता है, लगता है, हम कर रहे हैं, उस हामी में वो अहंकार है। वस्तुतः ये सब हो रहा है और होता ही रहेगा। हम इस ताने बाने में, इस चक्की में बस पिस रहे और खुद को इसमें पिसता मान रहे, बिकॉज हम इसको चक्की भी मान रहे। अगर आप इसे चक्की मानना ही छोड़ दो, अगर आप इसको दुख मानना ही छोड़ दो, मानना ही तो है, जानना ही तो है, जागना ही तो है, just about waking up to it. The sense of doership, the notion of volition, is at best only an impulse, a demonstration of the ego, of the me concept. As long as this condition remains, So long as there is identification with the phenomenal object as a separate me, as so long must bondage continue. जब तक तुम अपने आप को कर्ता और भोक्ता समझते रहोगे तब तक तो ये माया जाल चलता रहेगा. The only practice which can free man from the poison of doership is the abandonment of this identification with the particular object as a me. Such abandonment can only come through the clear and deep understanding of the faith that volition or sense of doership is merely an inference because there really is no entity to exercise it. Human beings may think that they live their lives, but in fact their lives are being lived as a part of the total functioning of this entire phenomenal manifestation. All events together constitute the functioning of the manifestation, according to the inexorable chain of causation. It would be credible to imagine that such functioning of totality could leave any room or scope for individual volition, except, of course, as a part of that functioning. It is for this reason that Ashtavakra refers to faith as the only remedy for the snake bite of doership, the faith that the human being exists, not as an individual body, mind entity, but as merely a phenomenal object, but as a noumenon. Not as an individual object, but as the one subject. Such faith brings about the spontaneous and sudden understanding that I am the one subject, and the entire phenomenal manifestation is my objective expression. I am the universal consciousness within which has spontaneously arisen the totality of phenomenal manifestation. And Ashtavakra continues. Just as the all-pervading space is both inside and outside the pot, so also the external and all-pervading consciousness is immanent in all beings and objects. The boundary of the pot may appear to condition and limit the space within the pot, but in fact space as such cannot be conditioned by the pot, which itself exists in space. Similarly, although the universal consciousness may appear to be conditioned by the individual psychosomatic apparatus, all phenomenal objects are merely appearances in consciousness. All there is consciousness, immanent in everything phenomenal, inasmuch as there cannot be any phenomena without consciousness. In this concluding verse, Ashtavakra brings out the importance of emphasizing the ground, the background, and the immanence rather than the personal element, so that the final spotlight is not so much on the true nature of the self, but more on the withdrawal into the impersonality. Instead of saying that your true nature is consciousness, he says that all there is, within and without, all phenomena, is consciousness. So I conclude chapter 1 here and meet all of you soon with chapter 2 of the Ashtavakra Mahageeta.